The distant howl of a wolf echoed through the Montana wilderness as Hank Irwin stood on his porch, Winchester rifle propped against the railing, watching the approaching storm clouds with weary eyes. It was 1875, 3 years since he'd buried his wife and infant son, victims of a harsh winter and harsher fever that had swept through Helena. Since then, he'd retreated to this lonely cabin 20 miles from town, running cattle and avoiding humanity with equal dedication. The first drops of rain began to fall as Hank noticed movement at the edge of his property. Squinting through the dimming light, he could make out a figure stumbling along the dirt path toward his home. Visitors were rare enough to raise concern, especially with sunset approaching and the storm rolling in. He reached for his rifle, more from habit than threat, and waited. The figure drew closer, and Hank realized it was a woman. Her steps were uneven, her body hunched against the strengthening wind. She wore what appeared to be little more than rags, a tattered dress and shawl that provided minimal protection from the elements. Her dark hair whipped wildly around her face as she approached his cabin with determination that belied her obvious exhaustion. Hank stepped down from the porch as she reached his gate. Up close, he could see the desperation in her eyes, the hollowness in her cheeks, and the tremble in her hands as she gripped the fence post for support. "Can I help you, madam?" he asked, his voice rough from disuse. She began, then swayed dangerously. Hank moved forward instinctively, reaching her just as her knees buckled. He caught her against his chest, feeling how terribly light she was, barely more than skin and bone beneath the damp, threadbare clothing. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the rising wind. "I have nowhere else to go." The rain was falling in earnest now, soaking them both. Hank made a quick decision and lifted her into his arms. She weighed almost nothing as he carried her up the steps and into his cabin, kicking the door closed behind them. Inside, the warmth from his cookstove enveloped them. He set her gently in his one comfortable chair near the fire and stepped back, suddenly aware of the strangeness of having another person in his space after so long alone. The woman shivered violently, her eyes darting around the cabin as if assessing her situation. In the firelight, Hank could see her more clearly young, maybe 25, with a face that might have been beautiful if not marred by exhaustion and fear. A bruise darkened one cheekbone and her lip was split. "My name is Hank Irwin," he said, moving to pour a cup of coffee from the pot he kept warm on the stove. "This here's my ranch." "Tess," she replied, accepting the mug with trembling hands. "Tess Warren." "You running from something, Miss Warren?" he asked directly. Her eyes met his briefly before dropping to stare into her coffee. "Someone." Hank nodded, not pressing further. He'd seen that look before in the eyes of women fleeing violent husbands or worse. Out here, a woman alone had few options and fewer protections. "Storm's getting worse," he said, moving to stoke the fire. "You're welcome to stay the night. I can take you to town tomorrow if that's where you're headed." Tess shook her head quickly. "I can't go to town. He'll find me there." Hank considered this as he moved around the cabin, gathering a blanket and some dry clothes that had belonged to his wife. They'd be too short for Tess, who was taller than his Clara had been, but they'd be warm and dry. "Here," he said, handing her the bundle. "You can change behind that screen. I'll fix something to eat." While Tess changed, Hank busied himself with preparing a simple meal of beans, bacon, and biscuits left from the morning. His mind worked through the situation. A woman on the run, clearly desperate, showing up on his doorstep in the middle of nowhere. He should be suspicious, cautious at the very least, yet something about her spoke to the loneliness that had become his constant companion. He recognized in her eyes the same kind of loss he carried himself. Tess emerged from behind the screen, looking slightly better in the clean, if ill-fitting clothes. She'd attempted to tame her hair and washed her face, revealing a sprinkling of freckles across her nose and cheeks. Without the dirt and with some of the fear receding, Hank could see she was indeed a beautiful woman. "Thank you," she said softly, returning to the chair. "I haven't. It's been a while since anyone showed me kindness." Hank nodded, uncomfortable with gratitude. He served the food in silence, and they ate without speaking. The storm raged outside, rain lashing against the windows and thunder rumbling overhead. It was only after the meal was finished and he was washing the plates that Tess spoke again. "I don't mean to be a burden," she said. "I can work. I'm good with animals and I can cook and clean. I just need somewhere safe for a little while." Hank turned to look at her, this stranger who'd appeared like a ghost out of the storm. "Who's after you?" Tess tensed, her hands gripping the edges of the blanket she'd wrapped around herself. "My husband. Ex-husband, I suppose, though he doesn't see it that way." Her voice strengthened slightly. "I left him 3 weeks ago after he nearly killed me. I've been trying to get far enough away that he won't find me. And you think he's still looking? I know he is." She touched the bruise on her face. "He caught up to me in Billings. I barely got away. That's why I can't go to town. He'll check all the hotels, boarding houses. He's persistent." Hank considered this. He valued his solitude, had cultivated it deliberately after losing Clara and their son. The thought of having a stranger in his home, bringing potential trouble to his door, should have been enough to make him insist on taking her to town despite her protests. Instead, he found himself reaching into his pocket and pulling out a small brass key. It was the spare to his cabin, one he'd had made but never had reason to use. "Winter's coming," he said, holding the key out to her. "I could use help with the stock. Cabin's small, but there's a lean-to out back I've been meaning to fix up proper. Could make it livable with some work." Tess stared at the key, then at him, confusion and disbelief warring on her face. "You'd let me stay, just like that. You don't even know me." "I know enough," Hank replied, placing the key on the table between them. "You're in trouble and need help. I've got room and could use an extra pair of hands. Simple as that." It wasn't simple, of course. Nothing ever was. But as Tess reached out and took the key, her fingers brushing his, Hank felt something shift inside him like a door long rusted shut suddenly creaking open. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Don't need to say anything," Hank answered. "Get some rest. We'll figure out the rest tomorrow." He gave her his bed and made a pallet for himself by the fire. As he lay listening to the storm and the unfamiliar sound of another person's breathing in his home, Hank wondered if he'd made a terrible mistake or taken the first step toward living again rather than just surviving. Morning brought clear skies and an awkward silence as they navigated sharing the small space. Tess was clearly uncomfortable, moving carefully as if afraid to disturb anything. Hank found himself equally unsure, his normal routines disrupted by her presence. "I meant what I said," he told her over breakfast. "You can stay, help out, but I should know what I'm getting into. This husband of yours, how dangerous is he?" Tess's hand stilled around her coffee cup. "His name is Victor Blackwood. He owns half the businesses in Billings and has friends in law enforcement. He's charming when he wants to be, ruthless when crossed." She met Hank's eyes directly. "He killed my brother when he tried to help me leave the first time, made it look like a robbery gone wrong." Hank absorbed this, understanding now why she'd fled so far. "He has that kind of reach. Money buys loyalty," Tess said bitterly, "and fear does the rest. Victor always gets what he wants, always." "Not this time," Hank said with quiet certainty. "This is my land. Anyone comes here meaning harm, they'll regret it." A ghost of a smile touched Tess's lips. "You don't know what you're offering." "I do," Hank replied. A chance. That's all any of us can ask for. After breakfast, Hank showed Tess around the property, the barn where he kept his horses and a milk cow, the chicken coop, the small vegetable garden, and the lean-to attached to the back of the cabin that he proposed to convert into her quarters. "It'll take some work," he admitted, eyeing the space critically. "Need to shore up the walls, add a proper floor, put in a small stove for heat." "I can help," Tess offered, already assessing the space with a practical eye. "I'm stronger than I look." Hank found himself smiling for the first time in longer than he could remember. "I don't doubt it." They spent the day working side by side, Hank showing Tess the daily chores of ranch life while also beginning work on her quarters. She proved to be a quick learner and hard worker, despite her still obvious exhaustion and the healing injuries that sometimes made her wince when she thought he wasn't looking. As days turned into weeks, they developed a routine. Mornings were for essential chores, tending the animals, gathering eggs, milking the cow. Afternoons were spent improving the lean-to, which gradually transformed into a small but comfortable room with a bed, table, chair, and small stove. Evenings were spent in companionable silence or occasional conversation as they ate dinner and prepared for the next day. Hank learned that Tess had grown up on a small farm in Nebraska, the daughter of a widowed father who taught her everything about running a homestead. She'd met Victor Blackwood when he'd come through their town on business, charming the 19-year-old girl with promises of a better life. By the time she realized the kind of man he truly was, she was already trapped in a marriage that had become a prison. "He wasn't always cruel," she explained one evening as they sat by the fire. "At first he was attentive, generous, but then he changed, or maybe he just stopped pretending. Started with small things, criticizing what I wore, how I spoke, then controlling who I could see, where I could go. The first time he hit me was after I visited a friend without permission." Hank listened silently, his hands busy whittling a piece of wood, but his attention focused entirely on her words. "I should have left then, but I was ashamed, afraid. Alone in a town where everyone respected him and no one knew me." She stared into the fire. "It got worse, much worse, until finally I understood he would eventually kill me whether he meant to or not." "So you ran," Hank said. Tess nodded. "I planned for months. Saved every penny I could hide from him, waited until he was away on business. My brother helped me, though I begged him not to get involved." Her voice caught. "I should have insisted. When Victor returned and found me gone, he made an example of Thomas. To show what happens to those who help me." Hank set down his whittling and looked at her directly. "You're not responsible for your brother's death. Blackwood is, remember that." Tess met his gaze, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I do, every day." As October turned to November, the lean-to was completed, providing Tess with a space of her own. Hank found himself missing her presence in the main cabin, though he'd never admit it. The weather turned colder, and they worked together to prepare the ranch for winter, stocking firewood, preserving the last of the garden harvest, ensuring the animals had warm shelter. One evening, as the first snow began to fall, Hank returned from checking on the horses to find Tess had prepared a special dinner: venison stew with dumplings, corn bread, and an apple pie made from the last of the fall apples. "What's the occasion?" he asked, surprised by the effort. 2 months, she said simply. "It's been 2 months since I showed up on your doorstep. I wanted to thank you properly." Hank felt oddly touched by the gesture. They ate together, and for the first time since her arrival, the conversation flowed easily between them. Tess laughed at a story he told about a particularly stubborn mule he'd once owned, and the sound transformed her face, lighting up her eyes and bringing color to her cheeks. Hank found himself staring, suddenly aware of how much he'd come to enjoy her company. Not just as a helper around the ranch, but as a person who somehow understood his silences and respected his space while gradually bringing life back into his world. "What is it?" Tess asked, noticing his gaze. "You should laugh more often," he said before he could stop himself. "Suits you." A blush crept up her cheeks, and she looked down at her plate. "I haven't had much reason to these past years." "Maybe that's changing," Hank suggested quietly. Their eyes met across the table, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of the fragile connection that had formed, unexpected and unplanned. The moment was broken by a sound outside the distant but unmistakable approach of horses. Hank rose immediately, reaching for his rifle. "Stay inside," he told Tess, whose face had drained of color. "Could be nothing. Travelers looking for shelter from the snow, or it could be him," she whispered. Hank checked his rifle was loaded. "Either way, stay out of sight." He stepped onto the porch, rifle held ready but not raised. Through the gently falling snow, he could make out 3 riders approaching slowly. They stopped at his gate, and the lead rider called out, "Hello, the house. Looking for a place to wait out this weather." Hank didn't recognize the voice or the men, but something about their demeanor put him on edge. "There's a town 20 miles south," he called back. "Good hotel there." 20 miles is a long way in a snowstorm," the man replied. "We're just asking for your Christian charity, neighbor." The men made no move to leave, and Hank could feel the tension building. These weren't simple travelers, their horses were too fine, their clothes too city for this remote area. "I've got sickness in the house," Hank lied. "Nothing you want to catch, best move on." The leader's posture changed subtly. "Maybe what we're looking for is already in your house, friend. A woman. Dark hair, pretty when she cleans up. Name of Tess Blackwood. Her husband's mighty worried about her." Hank's grip tightened on his rifle. "No one here by that name." "Just me and my sick mother." The man laughed, a cold sound that carried clearly through the falling snow. "Your mother, is it? Funny, we heard you lived alone out here since your wife died. Heard you didn't have any family left at all." Hank raised his rifle to his shoulder. "You heard wrong. Now get off my property." The 3 men exchanged glances, and Hank could see them weighing their options. They hadn't expected armed resistance. "We don't want trouble," the leader said, his tone suggesting the opposite. "Mr. Blackwood just wants his wife back. He's offering a reward $500. That's good money for a rancher like you." "Better than dying over some runaway wife," one of the other men added. Hank didn't respond, keeping his rifle trained on them. After a long moment, the leader shrugged. "Have it your way, but this isn't over. Mr. Blackwood always gets what belongs to him." They turned their horses and rode back the way they'd come, disappearing into the thickening snowfall. Hank remained on the porch until he was certain they were gone, then went back inside. Tess stood in the middle of the room, her face ashen. "It was him, wasn't it? He sent them." Hank nodded, setting his rifle aside. "They're gone for now, but they'll be back, probably with more men." "I need to leave," Tess said immediately. "I've brought danger to your door. I never should have stayed this long." "Where would you go?" Hank asked. "In a snowstorm, with those men probably watching the trails. I don't know, but I can't stay here and put you at risk." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "He'll kill you, Hank, just like he killed Thomas." Hank moved to her, placing his hands on her shoulders. "Listen to me. You're not going anywhere tonight. We'll figure this out together." "You don't understand what he's capable of." "I understand enough," Hank interrupted. "I understand that you deserve to be free of him. I understand that sometimes a man has to stand for what's right, even when it's dangerous." Tess looked up at him, her eyes searching his face. "Why would you risk your life for me? You barely know me." Hank considered his answer carefully. The truth was, in the 2 months since Tess had arrived, something fundamental had changed for him. The emptiness that had consumed him since Clara and the baby died had begun to recede, replaced by a quiet appreciation for simple moments, Tess humming as she worked in the garden, the sound of her laughter, the way she'd leave a cup of coffee for him by the door when he came in from early morning chores. "I know enough," he said finally. "I know you're brave and strong. I know you deserve better than what life's handed you so far, and I know that having you here, it's made this place feel like home again." The confession hung between them, more than he'd meant to reveal. Tess's eyes widened slightly, and for a moment Hank feared he'd overstepped. Then she reached up, placing her hand against his cheek. "These past months," she whispered, "have been the first time in years I've felt safe. Like I could breathe again. Like I mattered as a person, not as a possession." Hank covered her hand with his own. "You matter, Tess, to me." The admission changed something between them, a boundary crossed that couldn't be uncrossed, but the threat outside remained, forcing them to focus on survival rather than the feelings gradually taking root. "We need a plan," Hank said, reluctantly stepping back. "They'll come back, probably tomorrow, likely with more men." Tess nodded, wiping away her tears and visibly gathering her strength. "What can we do?" Hank considered their options. "We could try to reach town, get help from the sheriff." "Victor has connections with law enforcement," Tess reminded him. "We can't be sure the sheriff isn't already on his payroll." "Then we stand and fight," Hank said grimly. "This is my land. I've defended it before." "Against 3 armed men or more," Tess shook her head. "That's suicide." "What about neighbors?" she asked after a moment. "Is there anyone nearby who might help?" Hank considered this. "Ben Walsh has a place about 5 miles west. We're not close, but he's a good man. Fought in the war, has 2 grown sons still living with him. Could we get there tonight?" In the snow, Hank looked out the window at the steadily falling snow. It would be risky, but staying here might be riskier. They made their decision quickly. Within half an hour they had packed essential supplies and saddled Hank's 2 best horses. The snow was falling heavily now, but Hank knew the way to Walsh's place even in poor visibility. They rode cautiously, alert for any sign of Blackwood's men. The snow provided both cover and challenge, hiding their tracks, but also making travel slow and treacherous. Hank led the way, frequently looking back to ensure Tess was managing. Despite her obvious exhaustion and fear, she rode well, further evidence of her strength and determination. They reached Walsh's ranch just as the storm intensified into a full blizzard. Ben Walsh was surprised to find them at his door but welcomed them in without question. When Hank explained the situation, the older man's expression darkened. "Victor Blackwood," he spat. "Know of him. Bad business what he does to women, heard stories." "Then you understand why we need help," Hank said. Walsh nodded, looking to his sons who had gathered to listen. "John, ride to the Thompson place. Get Bill and his boys. Mike, check our ammunition supplies." He turned back to Hank. "By morning we'll have 8, maybe 10 men here. Let Blackwood's thugs come then." The night passed tensely, with watches set and preparations made. By dawn, as Walsh had predicted, 8 additional men had arrived, neighbors responding to the call for help, each with their own reasons to distrust wealthy men who thought their money put them above the law. The storm had passed, leaving a pristine white landscape and clear visibility. Around mid-morning they spotted riders approaching, 7 men, led by the 3 who had visited Hank's cabin the previous day. "Let me talk to them," Tess said suddenly, as the men prepared their weapons. Hank turned to her in surprise. "Absolutely not. They've come to take you back to a man who nearly killed you." "They've come expecting one man defending a remote cabin," Tess argued. Not a dozen armed ranchers. If I speak to them first, maybe there doesn't have to be bloodshed." "She has a point," Walsh said. "My boys can keep rifles on them the whole time. First wrong move, they'll regret it." Reluctantly, Hank agreed, though every instinct screamed against putting Tess in danger. They arranged themselves strategically, Walsh's men positioned out of immediate sight, but with clear shots if needed, while Hank and Tess stood on the porch to meet the approaching riders. The men stopped at a respectful distance when they saw Tess. The leader, clearly surprised, removed his hat. "Mrs. Blackwood," he called, "your husband is very concerned about you. He's asked us to escort you home safely." "My name is Tess Warren," she replied, her voice carrying clearly in the cold air. "I have no husband. Victor Blackwood has no claim on me." The man's expression hardened. "Now, madam, that's not how the law sees it. A wife belongs with her husband." "The law also says a man can't beat his wife near to death," Hank interjected, "or murder her brother for helping her escape." "Those are serious accusations," the man said, his hand drifting toward his holster. "Mr. Blackwood is a respected businessman." "Mr. Blackwood is a monster," Tess replied. "And I am never going back to him. Tell him that. Tell him also that I'm not alone anymore, and that if he continues to pursue me, I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of man he truly is." The leader's eyes narrowed as he assessed the situation. His gaze moved past Hank and Tess, noticing movement at the windows of Walsh's house, the glint of sunlight on rifle barrels. "Seems you've found yourself some protection," he observed. "But how long will that last? These men have their own lives, their own concerns. They can't watch over you forever." "They don't need to," Hank said, stepping slightly forward. "I will," the man laughed. "One rancher against a man with Blackwood's resources. That's a losing bet, friend." "Is it?" Walsh's voice came from the side of the house as he stepped into view, rifle raised. One by one, his sons and neighbors emerged from their positions, all armed and ready. "You're outnumbered today," Walsh continued, "and you'll be outnumbered tomorrow and the day after that. Word spreads fast out here. Every rancher from here to the territory line will know about Blackwood and his hired guns. How many of us do you think he can fight?" The men shifted uncomfortably in their saddles, clearly reassessing their options. They hadn't signed on for a war with the local ranchers. "This isn't worth dying for," Hank added. "Tell Blackwood to let her go. Tell him she's under the protection of every decent man in this territory now." The leader held Hank's gaze for a long moment, then nodded slightly. "I'll deliver your message. But don't think this is over. Mr. Blackwood isn't a man who gives up easily." "Neither am I," Hank replied. The men turned their horses and rode away, disappearing over the ridge without looking back. Only when they were completely out of sight did Hank allow himself to exhale, turning to find Tess watching him with an expression that made his heart quicken. "You didn't have to do that," she said softly. "Put yourself between me and them like that." "Yes, I did," Hank replied simply. Walsh approached, slapping Hank on the shoulder. "They won't be back today, but that doesn't mean the danger's past. Blackwood sounds like the persistent type." "What will you do?" one of the other ranchers asked Tess. She looked at Hank, a question in her eyes that he understood immediately. "We'll go back to my place," he said. "Together." The ride back to Hank's cabin was quiet, both of them processing the morning's events and what might come next. The snow sparkled in the sunlight, creating a deceptively peaceful scene. "Did you mean what you said?" Tess asked finally as they approached his property. "About watching over me." Hank slowed his horse to ride beside her. "I meant every word, but it's not just about protection, Tess." She met his eyes. "What is it about then?" "It's about not wanting to go back to the way things were before you arrived," he admitted. It's about realizing that all this time I thought I wanted solitude, what I really wanted was peace. And somehow, with you here, I've found that. Tess's expression softened. I've found something too. Something I thought was lost forever. She hesitated. Hope, a sense of possibility. They reached the cabin and dismounted. Hank tended to the horses while Tess went inside to start a fire. When he joined her, she was standing by the window, looking out at the snow-covered landscape. "We can't live in fear of him forever," she said without turning around. "No," Hank agreed, moving to stand beside her. "Which is why I'm riding to Helena next week to speak with a judge I know. A good man, honest. He can help us build a case against Blackwood for your brother's murder, for what he did to you." Tess turned to him, hope and fear warring in her expression. "You think that's possible? He's powerful, connected." "No man is above the law," Hank said. "Not completely. And men like Blackwood always leave evidence behind. They get careless, thinking they are untouchable. It could take months, years even." "Then it takes years," Hank replied. "In the meantime, you have a home here for as long as you want it." Tess studied his face. "And if what I want changes?" "If I want more than just safety," Hank's heart hammered in his chest as he understood her meaning. "Then you should know that I stopped thinking of you as just someone to protect a long time ago." He reached out slowly, giving her time to step away if she chose. Instead, she moved closer, allowing him to gently tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. "I never thought I'd feel this way again," he confessed quietly. "After Clara died, I was certain that part of me was gone forever." "I know," Tess whispered. "I felt the same. After what Victor did to me, I couldn't imagine ever trusting a man again. But you're different, Hank. You gave me a key and asked for nothing in return." "Not nothing," Hank corrected her. "I asked for your help with the ranch, and you've given much more than that. You've brought life back to this place. Back to me." Tess smiled, a full, genuine smile that transformed her face. "Is that your way of saying you care for me, Hank Irwin?" "It's my way of saying I love you," he replied, the words feeling right despite their short acquaintance. Some things couldn't be measured in time. Tess's eyes widened, then filled with tears not of sorrow but of joy. "I love you too," she whispered. "I think I have since you gave me that key." Hank drew her into his arms, and when their lips met, it felt like coming home after a long, cold journey. The kiss was tender, full of promise and possibility. They both knew challenges remained. Blackwood wouldn't give up easily, and building a legal case against a powerful man would be difficult. But standing together in the warm cabin as snow fell gently outside, they faced the future not with fear but with determination and hope. Spring came to Montana with its usual flourish of wildflowers and new life. The ranch had prospered under their joint care, with new calves in the pasture and the garden expanded to twice its previous size. Tess had made the cabin truly a home, adding small touches that reflected her growing confidence and permanence. The judge from Helena had been as helpful as Hank had hoped, initiating an investigation into Thomas Warren's death that had already uncovered troubling evidence against Blackwood. The businessman's empire had begun to crumble as other victims came forward, emboldened by Tess's courage. On a perfect May morning, Hank and Tess were married in a small ceremony attended by the neighbors who had stood with them that snowy day. The wedding was simple but joyful, a celebration not just of their love but of the community that had formed around them. As they stood on the porch that evening, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold, Hank wrapped his arm around his wife's waist. "Not bad for a woman who showed up in rags," he teased gently. Tess laughed, leaning into his embrace. "And a lonely cowboy who handed me a key." "Best decision I ever made," Hank said sincerely. "Better than marrying me?" Tess asked with mock indignation, Hank smiled, turning her to face him. "That wasn't a decision. That was inevitable from the moment you stepped onto my land." As they sealed this truth with a kiss, both knew that what had begun as an act of desperate need on one side and reluctant charity on the other had transformed into something neither had dared hope for: a love strong enough to heal past wounds and build a future bright with promise. The key Hank had given Tess that first night hung on a hook by the door no longer needed to lock or unlock anything, but kept as a reminder of how the simplest acts of kindness can open doors to unexpected joy and new beginnings.